When configuring split scopes on dhcp, the basic point is simply to split the pool of addresses for each subnet. Let's take a look at an example of doing this. So let's open up dhcp. And in the console, I only have one server here, one dhcp server. With split scopes, you need two, so you can either use remote desktop, or I'm going to go ahead and, in the console here, add a second server to the console. So I'll add our other computer here, computer 1, which will be our second dhcp server. Okay, and the second computer has been added to the console. We'll go ahead and click on that and get it set up. Okay, now both servers are in the console and refreshed, and you'll notice neither one is authorized. We can still set up the server with split scopes without actually giving out addresses. So on the, we'll say the first DHCP server here, computer 1, let's say computer 1 here is in the 192.168.1 network, and that there are 200 possible addresses to give out. The second server, we'll say, is in the 192.168.2 network, and also has 200 addresses to give out. So the first thing you do on the first server is make a new scope. Go through the wizard here, and we could call this scope for subnet 1, so to speak. When you get to this point in the wizard, you define all 200 addresses. Now we're still going to split them, but at this point the convention is to define all 200 addresses. So we'll say 1.1 up through 192.168.1.200, all 200 addresses. But on the next spot in the wizard, here we exclude 25% of the addresses. So 192.168.1.151 to 200. Now again, 200 addresses, so 75% of those addresses would be 150. The other quarter would be the remaining 50 addresses. So our scope includes all 200, but we're excluding 151 through 200, that is 25% of the addresses. Least duration's fine. We're not going to do any options for this example, and we just finish off the wizard there. So there's our scope. Checking out the address pool, we'll see yes, .1 through .200, but we're excluding 151 to 200. On the second DHCP server, you would do the exact same thing. So you would create a scope for the second subnet. Now this time we're going to define a range from 192.168.2.1 through 2.200. So we're in a second subnet, a different subnet, 200 new different addresses. But again, we're going to exclude the last 25% of those addresses. There's our exclusion range, .151 to .200. And we'll finish off the wizard. No options at this point. There we go. Double check our address pool, and there we go, 2.1 through 2.200, 200 total addresses, but we're excluding 2.151 to 2.200, 50 of those addresses. Now at this point we do not have split scopes. All we've done is define a range of 200 addresses on the first server and 200 addresses on the second server, one for subnet 1, one for subnet 2. So for split scopes, you actually define two scopes on each server. The idea is that if server 1 goes out, what do the clients in subnet 1 do? The clients in subnet 1 will need to contact the second server. Now the second server here does not have any addresses for the first subnet. Therefore, we're going to have to define a new scope. We'll go through the wizard again. So we're going to name this scope the split scope for subnet A, or subnet 1. That way we know these are extra addresses for subnet 1, even though our server is in subnet 2 and normally only gives out addresses for subnet 2. Again, this is just for fault tolerance. This will tell us we got a split scope from subnet 1. Now at this point in the wizard, you've got one of two options. You can define the address range for the split scope to be 1.151 through 1.200. Or you can do the entire range again, just like you did on the first server. So we can do a range of 1 to 200, and then on the next page, exclude 75% of the addresses this time. So we're excluding 1 through 150. So on the second server, we're still defining an entire range of 200 addresses, but now we're excluding 75% of those addresses that are normally being given out by the first server on the first subnet. We'll use the rest of the defaults for the wizard. There are our two scopes here. So we've got a split scope from subnet 1, and we've got a regular scope for subnet 2. And then you would follow the same exact process on the other server. New scope wizard. And there we go. We've got two scopes defined on each server. The server in subnet 1 has a scope for subnet 1 that defines all 200 addresses, but excludes 25% of those addresses, 151 through 200. On the second server, we have that split scope. So our address pool on the second server also defines the full range, but excludes 1 through 150, effectively allowing the second server to only use 151 through 200, and vice versa. So on server 2, we have a normal full scope for subnet 2 of 200 addresses, excluding 25% of those addresses, and the reverse on the first server. Define the whole range, exclude 75%.